Right. Tell me about the story of your your grandfather and the Eureka's. No, your great grandfather or your grandfather was.
Great grandfather, old James. Yeah, well, he was fighting. He had a claim, as they called it, the diggers' claim in Creswick. And on that Saturday afternoon, on about the 3rd of December, 54, there was a couple of 300 miners walked into Ballarat, and he was among them. And of course, all about the history. The miners the sailors hit them about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was hardly any of them there. Hardly any of the miners left. They'd wandered away to get a bit of tucker or sleep in court or something like that. Of course, they the minority put up a bit of a fight. He got away. Well, he must have because he came being in mirror brass. Anyway, Peter lost an arm, didn't he? Peter Lawley he lost an arm in that fight.
But not your grandfather.
He got away scot-free. He didn't get these. And I said before, his son and daughter-in-law, they didn't know where he was for a long time, over in Cornwall. But somebody from here wrote home to England and told him that old James was right here in Ballarat. And he's a lucky miner. So they appealed in. They've tried to get in. They tried to get to immigrate out here, but that was chock-a-block because of that many wanting to get out here. There was no more room for any more. So they prompt for New Zealand, and that's where they went. In New Zealand. And they landed in Littleton in 1864, and they left Plymouth on the Tiptree sailing ship, and about 330 odd passengers on it. And they landed in Littleton in 76 days out of Plymouth. And on the way out, they lost 17 of their passengers. 12 kiddies and 5 grown up, I think it was. Could have been the other way around, but that's 17 that was died on the way out. Which was a mighty job, I reckon, considering 330 odd passengers on a sailing ship, and then of course it'd be the crew.
Where did you hear about that? Was it in a diary or from your parents?
Granny, old grandmother. She used to sit there, and I'd get up there. She's sitting there rocking his hair alongside the fire, and she'd talk, and I'd listen. And I remember it all. And she told us, and she couldn't read or write, but she was dead to write just the same. Of course, they were immigrants, and they signed on for a couple of years. According to her, they're pretty right. Well, one day, there was a big ship come out to sea and signaled to the shore, and then some of the harbour master and a few of the heads of the harbour over there went out. And there was some awful sort of a plague on board the ship, and they wouldn't let them land again. So Granny and old grandfather wasn't satisfied there, and them and a few more. And in the night they cleared. Did a moonlight flitter, you'd call it. And they got down to Timaru, wherever that is over there, and got on a steamer from Melbourne. And they landed in Melbourne. And then they got on the bullock wagons and come to Maryborough. And that's where they were in there in about 65 they come there. Well, my grandfather must have been, he was, well, he had what a mining context for getting wood, getting their timber and timbering for their shafts and all that sort of business. He's in a pretty big way there for a while, and then he was buying shares and selling shares. Sometimes they'd be millionaires, and another next week they'd be broke, and according to Granny. But they shipped us from there, shipped us around after the mines, old Ararat. There's over in the mines in Ararat, he was over there. That was the Alluvial over there, I think. And then shipped it up to Bialaba up here, across the land. And there wasn't very much mining there, no quartz, well, a little bit of quartz mining, but there was a lot of alluvial in what they call the made hills there, down under the cement. Terrible lot of alluvial gold there was. But then there was someone found a reef. They called it what they called a welcome reef. And the company decided to sink a shaft. And old grandfather William, he got the contract, even another chap from Bialaba. And they sank the welcome shaft. Well, then it wasn't much good. It was only shallow, a couple 100 feet or something. And he transferred down to the friend's birthday down there, as I said, around about October, November in 1882, and then he got killed in February 1883 down there. And that's where the family stayed.
Can you describe what happened to him when he got killed again?
Well, yeah, they sank the last ship, the last 100 feet in the birthday, down to 800 feet. And of course, they cut the Platte. The Platte, that's where they land. When they got to make crosscut, well, they got to have a place to land, put tracks and everything. Well, it's like a room, a Platte they call it. But of course, they had to timber the top, keep from any falling stone on them. And this big lump of square timber that they lowered down the shaft, it slipped out of the ropes, and it hit on the edge and hit him in the back, according to, well, that was the evidence when they had the inquiry, and hit him in the back and broke his ribs away. I think it was in February 1883. Well, I'm sure it was.
And your father worked in the same mine?
Yes. In the same mine. And Uncle Jim did too, and Uncle Jack did too. And Uncle Ern, that was the youngest brother of him, he was a blacksmith on it. Or a blacksmith assistant on the same mine. There was two down there. There was two mines down there. See, there was the big Queen's birthday. That was in front of where I lived. And then further over, there was the big one. That was the middle plant. There was a 40-head battery on that. On the one in front of home was only 15 head. But there was a 15-head battery on the one in front of the place down there. And a deep well pump. And a winder. They had three big engines in there. And that deep well pump, it had a 10-inch column, a cast iron pipes, 9 foot long, an inch thick, or better, from 600 feet up. And they had the big bob, what they call a deep well pump. And that's where we used to go down there when the big bob was gone, and it threw about a 10-inch column of water up at about 2 feet. and I think it went about, not sure, but 12 or 15 strokes to the minute.
And that was still operating when you were a boy.
It had the big wooden launders going away, running the water away out. And that's where we used to get in our make little wooden boats and float on them. Never race down the launders.
I don't know. What would it sound like with all that machinery going? That would be going 24 hours a day?
Yeah. That's right. They'd be going 24 hours a day. You see, they had to use that deep well, but it only went down to 600 feet. And the one over further was 800 feet. But any water below the 600 feet, that deep well pump couldn't deal with it. Well, then on the bigger mine over there, they had the big winding engine and 2 tanks, 180-gallon tanks, coming up and down and tipping out. Take about 2 minutes for a tank to go down and fill up and come up again and fire its contents out. And that's where we used to go in the summertime when off school holiday. We'd go over there and get underwear where they tip and where they'd empty and ice cold water.
Because it was from down so low.
Yeah, salty water, brackish.
What was the noise there at night, like at night for sleeping? I mean, how close
Didn't
were
make
you?
me notice. Never heard it.
How far away was your house from that operation?
Oh, only about 70 yards. Never took any notice.
And at that stage, when you were just a boy, how old, 10 or so, did you imagine you'd be working in the mine too?
Never thought of it. Never thought of working in the mine. I thought later on I would have if there'd been any around. But the father, he said, no, you're not to go down the mine. He said, you're not to go down the mine. He said, you got to stay on top. And that's what we did.
What happened to those people that you knew that were miners? How many of them got the miner's disease?
Well, some of them got worse than others. See, there was my father, well, he's only 64. And yet the fellow used to live here, old Tom Skane, he had a family here, this was his place. He lived till he was 83, I think. Yet he worked in the mine with the old fellow all those years. There was another old buckaroo up in Ingham, old Jim Bryson. He was 75 or 6. Then he didn't die with the miners. Neither did old Tom. And yet my father and Uncle Jim, they got it. Of course, Uncle Jim, the other brother, well, he died too with that broken hill lead. He's only 46. But he went to Broken Hill. And he got down in the lead mines there and didn't last long at all. You know Pat, do you, brother? When you're looking at Pat, you're looking at old Uncle Jack. Built just like him, only a bit bigger, I think. And he went away to nothing.
You saw him when he got to... You saw him when he had the problem, when he had the disease?
Oh, I saw him when he's dying in Mira, place to go there.
And what about your father? How long did it take him after he first knew he got it?
15 years. According to Dr. Crook. Dr. Crook was in the Dunolly, a proper old-time doctor. And he said to me when I reported in that said, well, he said he took 15 years to die.
Was that painful for him, do you reckon?
Well, like it was right at the finish. The last couple of years, yes, it was. But up till then, he was able to do a bit. As a matter of fact, him and I were digging up the old Burn Creek lead up there in 1931. We were digging, shallow holes, alluvial holes, washing a bit of dirt, getting a little bit of gold that way. That's in 31. Of course, then on, well, it didn't take long. When he started to go down, well, he went down pretty quick. Well, he died in July 1933, so he hung on a bit. There's nothing of him left. He's about 13, 14 stone. He's about, oh, he's a bit taller than I am, and of course he was bigger. Wider, bigger. But he went down to, I don't know, about half his weight, I'd say, I guess. Never weighed him.
What else do you remember of the mines when they were working here?
How do you mean?
Well, when you were, when did the mines actually stop working here? When did the birthday stop working?
Well, I think I could never pinpoint when the big fella stopped, but I reckon it's somewhere around 95, 96 when the big one stopped. And of course, they'd go around and they'd start it up again, but only in a small way. They might only have a couple of men, or perhaps 4 men down below. And they never had a crushing. In my memory that I can remember, they never had a crushing. So therefore, they wasn't doing any good. They're doing a bit of exploring work right at the finish. And there was only two of them that my dad and old Tom Cole, they were the last two. And of course, there was the underground boss and, of course, the driver, engine driver. They had to go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, come home at 4 after, and that's all that was going on then, around about then. And they put in a crosscut down at 500 feet, or number 5 they called it. And they come across a reef, a quartz reef, right in their crosscut. And they turned on it. See, they'd gone east and west with their drive, but they turned on it and were following it down south. And of course, a working drive is about 7 foot high, and the width of the whatever they can work in. If the reef was this wide or that wide, they'd take it all out. See, the old underground boss would come down and get a sample of it, and dolly it up when he went up and wash it to see how gold content. He'd come down. I guess we'll save it. And he come down the next day. Oh, it's no good. And it went on for a week or so, or something like that. And Father said to old Tom, he said, I don't know. He said, but every time that old Jim gets the stuff to save, he said, it comes from the bottom of the drive, right underfoot. Tom said, yeah. Well, he said, look, we'll put in a couple of holes down underfoot, he said, today, and blow them. So they built a couple of holes down with a hammer and drill and loaded them up with dynamite, and they blew them. And when the smoke cleared away, they went back again, and there it was. And there was like the stone blown up, and there was gold in nearly every stone laying there. They'd been driving along the top of the chute of gold, they reckon. That's their argument. When they shot down underfoot, they just hit the top of the chute. And that stuff still there, never cleaned up, because that afternoon, the underground boss come down. Got bad news, boys, he said. I said, what's wrong? He said, the engine driver found a crack in the crankshaft of the engine. And he said, and he said he wanted to come up on the tank. He said, you got to crawl the ladders. That was the final. That was the finish.
What did that mean? They had to crawl
Had to walk up 500 feet on the ladders.
on the ladders.
On the ladders, yeah.
Well, this is because the steam engine itself, the tank had a crack in it.
The crankshaft of the
Oh,
engine.
the crankshaft of the engine.
Yeah.
Right.
And the driver wouldn't take the risk. He said, "No, I'm not going to pull him in with that." He said, "No, I know it's there." He said, "No, I'm not going to take the chance." He said, "If I didn't know it was there," he said, "I'll pull him up, of course." But he said, "I found the crankshaft, crack in the crankshaft of the engine, you know, the main crankshaft." And he said, "Well, we just had luck with the brake when they're coming up and on the tank. They'd be on the tank. They wouldn't be in a cage. They'd be on the tank." And no, and they crawled the ladders, and that was the final shift.
And there was still gold there.
Yeah. They talked about that for years. I talked about it till they died, both of them, anyhow.
How much, I mean, these days you hear a lot of stories about how it's not so much the gold that's in the mine that seems to be important, but how much people can buy and sell the mine for. There's a lot of speculation.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
No doubt it was happening then as well.
Yeah, the mining lords are corrupt. Yeah, they were corrupt even right through the piece there. Now, this birthday down here, for argument's sake, it was on the teetering and tottering there for 2 or 3 years before it finally got to go. And you had a lot of shares, and I had a lot of shares, and someone else had a lot of shares, and then they putting out the calls, the calls for the shares, and most of the blokes might pay some, and then they'd renege, or wouldn't pay their call, and wouldn't pay their call. Well, of course, those shares, but they're all still shares. And if you were lucky enough to grab hold, to find out what was going on, now I'll tell you, these are some of Granny's tales and old time, and some of the other older fellas too. There was a pub next to us down there, and there was an old fella called King owned it. And he had a big what they call an old drawing room where he used to sit in his chair and look, and he could see down to the mouth of the shaft. And every afternoon he'd sit there and watch the 4 o'clock for the cage come up. And I used to wonder what his idea was. Anyhow, one day he was sitting there, and up come the cage, and a couple of miners got out of it, and one dragged a big red handkerchief out of his pocket and worked his head, and old King bounded up and out the back and got on his horse and raced into the legal office in Dunolly. And there was a lot of those shares there, and he scooped them up at 6pence a share. And they struck gold, and good gold. And those shares went up to 32 and 6pence a share. And that was perfectly legal to do that.
So that was a signal from his mate.
Yeah. Yeah, King knew they'd put in what they call an exploration crosscut, see? And of course they hit the reef, and there was the gold. And they never looked back from then till, well, somewhere in the middle 90s. That's when it finally collapsed. Because in my memory, that the plant the big one over there where the 40-head battery had been, well, there was only sort of one engine there then, the big winding engine, and that's about all it was there then. No battery, no remains of any battery, and just a winding engine. So they could keep the water down to below 600.
This is at the birthday.
Mm.
What about the Belgium?
Oh, well, the Belgium was hit. I don't know when the Belgium War. I don't know, pretty early in the piece. There was a chap in Dunolly found that. Uh, he found oh, there's two places, two reefs up there, what they call the Belgian Reef and the Perseverance. Well, the Perseverance, it's right on top of the hill up there, and there was a family early in the piece called Pikes. 3 or 4 Pikes they come out here from Somerset in England. And they worked out, these 3 or 4 brothers worked down to 180 feet, down to the water. And they had down where my daughter lives there now, down in the town, they had a Chilean mill there, grinding up their quartz. You seen the Chilean mill at Sovereign Hill? That big concrete effect. Well, that's what they had there, down there. Wasn't like it, of course. Well, they worked that down 180 feet. It was just good enough to pay wages all the time. It was never real rich, make it I could find out. But down below it, this old Ernstine, he found the reef down there, and it rich to see. It was real rich gold, but it only went down to about 800 feet. But if you see that big railway hotel on Dunolly now, well, he built that out of that gold. He called that the Belgian. Well, then the company got hold of it and they finished. And they sank a main shaft between that reef, and another on top of the hill. They sank it down to 200 feet. And they had cross-cut, the two. But I never got anything much good. But in about 1914, there was an old fella come around there called Dyring. And he got busy, and they opened up the Belgium again. They put a plant on it. They put a winding engine, a little winding engine, what do they call it?
Traction engine?
No. A winder. Then put tanks and then put powered blades and tanks on it and everything like that. And they cleaned it out. Oh, they got a few crushings. I think the best crushing was about 60. They got about 60 ounces out of one crushing. Now they put a 10-head battery on it and a stone cracker, and it was all right there. A few men working there. Went through about 1914 or somewhere to 24, which wasn't a bad effort. It only got down to 300 feet. I remember when they sank the last 100 feet down to 300, we had to go up there and watch them.
What would you see at that stage?
Nothing. Just seeing the cages come up and get emptied and down again. They use what they call a kibble in a sink. It's a big 60 or 80 gallon iron bucket with a tail chain bolted on the bottom of it. Tail chain about 8 to 10 foot long, big heavy chain. And That lowers down, and the miners down there digging it and load that up, and the driver pulls it up with a winch, and they got a big, when it comes up to the end of the top of the shaft, they got a big wooden door made of heavy planks, 3 or 4 inch planks, the width of the shaft, and they got it on hinges right down the bottom of the, you know, and then they got a rope or yarn over on a pulley, and when they bring the they can like it's standing up there when the gibble comes up, they can pull the counterweight they got there, and it goes over on a slope like that across the shaft, and the kibble the driver lowers the kibble down on it, and the chain got a big knot in it, catches in there and tips it into a truck. The contents of the kibble tips it into one of those railway mine truck. You seen the mine trucks, haven't you?
Mm.
Little 4 wheels. That held about, I don't know, about 9 feet, I think. 9 cubic feet or something like that. Of course, pull the kibble up again, and they pull the weight down, and there they go. That's how they sink them. I can't use a cage because they haven't got any skids.
Tell me about what happened to the equipment at the birthday mine.
Oh, you mean the engine thing? Oh, I told you the other day they blew them up. They blew them to pieces down there. Oh, yeah. Oh, there was one dirty big engine there, the battery engine. I remember seeing that. And they blew the cylinder clean in half. And there it was, like it laying there. It was like looking in an empty bucket. Only there was a big thick iron, about that thick, the walls of the cylinder, and oh, it was all smooth and still oily after all those years. But that engine would have driven a big ship.
And you actually watched them blow it up.
Well, I was home when they grew it. We got down there looking around where everything was clear. Lumps of metal laying everywhere.
What was the noise like?
Oh, it's terrific when the explosion would go. Must be the old bloke who blew it. He was an old retired engine driver, and old Jimmy Elliott, his name was. He's pretty friendly with our family. In fact, I think he's related away back some way. And he'd come diving round out of the place and run and get behind a brick wall there. And then we'd know when the shot was going, see? It wasn't unexpected. And he just did it in the daytime. He never did any blowing at night or anything like that. Just in the daylight hours, that's all the only time he'd work. But there must have been a lot of metal flying around, because this last few years since they found out the detective business, of course, there's been dozens and dozens of people down there with them poking around with old mine water. And they'd get a blast and they'd dig, and there'd be lumps of metal that blew away years ago when they'd blown it up, 50, 60 yards away. Big lumps of metal. There's one big lump there. It was right in the middle of our track across the. Matter of fact, if I took you down there now, I'd probably find the hole they'd dig it up out of, right in the middle of our track over to the mine, over to the cyanide. Somebody detected that down under the ground. They rooted up, and there, this big lump of solid, remains of an engine bed, about that thick, I suppose, I don't know how many pounds away, but they dug it up. Thought they had a gold or something, I suppose. And they left it laying there too, and left the hole there too. We had to fill that in.
How long would it take them to demolish the whole mine?
Oh, it took him quite a few days. A few weeks, I suppose. It's getting a long way back now. Of course, time didn't worry me then. But I was only about 10, 11, 9, 10 or 10 or something about that.
And what happened to all that scrap?
Well, I made a mistake the other day when I was telling you about it. I told you it went to Japan. Well, it didn't. It went to Germany. But you said it'd come back at us the same as Japan. Well, it did too in 1915. France.
And what do they do? They loaded it onto the railway trucks here.
Yes. They were the one railway trucks. Then I suppose in the ships. Well, of course, be in the ships. Down there somewhere. And they had that big Cornish boilers. They pulled them out, as I said before. They hooked those big tractors onto them, Fowler tractors onto them, and pulled them out of end on, big 9 or 10 ton boilers, out of the brickwork. And they carted them down to the railway station down there and put them in those big. We had a big truck then on the railway, it's called a QR. It was 30 odd feet, 30 feet long, I think. Probably made for that sort of thing, to cart those things around the country in those days. It was a long wooden railway truck with bogey wheels on the ends, set of 4. And of course, we had the wooden platforms down there. Then they go down there, and you could roll a big boiler into a truck also, the wooden platform they used decks, and then they had what they call the crab winch. You ever see one of them? Those ship things.
And with the mines, what else would you be able? What else would you have watched in those days as a boy? With the mine operations still going,
Sure, that's about all there was to watch.
blacksmiths.
Well, here we poking around the blacksmiths, and we be poking down around there. And as I said before, in the school holiday, we'd go over around the mine and get in under the splash of the tanks, and then go and get in the middle of someone's crop. You're just getting right and you're asleep, and then then we then all the way down to Dunolly, that old creek had some real deep holes in it. That Burnt Creek. And the hell of a creek down there too. They'd have a little, and you could see the gravel bottom, all those mineral water, salty water. We'd swim in there, and paddle in there, and all the time. When someone get drowned, because they tend to fill with deep, a lot of those holes.
Tell me about the army business with the boys.
The army. Oh. Well, when around about 1910 or somewhere thereabout, I think it was Andy Fisher's government. I'm not sure, but I think it was Andy Fisher's government that brought in that compulsory military training for boys, 14 years old, for home defence. They couldn't send them a yard out of Australia, but that is for home defence. Well, then, yeah, that is all right. It works out. But as I said before, they built the depot here and there. There was one in Dunolly. There was a big what we call the drill hall. It was a dirty big building about, well, I don't know, 60, 70 feet long and about 20 odd feet, 30 foot wide. And that's where we used to go when it was bad weather, do our training. But if you lived within 5 miles of that depot in there, you had to go. And of course, when you go and kicking up a noise about it, oh, they get a map. Oh, it's not. Yes, I said, but we don't come with a crow flying. We've got to go around the road. That didn't count. It was only 4 miles. They go, about that. Of course, that hurt a bit. Would have hurt a lot. But the whole thing was that we got anybody that lived around there. The boys around that school down there, they got hooked in, whether they liked it or whether they didn't. They got hooked in there, and we had to go in there. We had to do so many hours every year. We had to serve so many hours. We had the record, the days that we had to be there. And Wednesday afternoon was 4 hour stint. Most of them was compulsory. You had to be there for them. But then there was odd times, what they call the compulsory one. But you'd only go there to try and make up if you'd lost one of those compulsory ones. Or the voluntary one, you'd have to go to the voluntary one to make up. You had to put in so many hours. Otherwise, they'd hook you in if they felt like it and take you down to that blasted place in Queen Street.
What was that all about?
Punishment camp, they called it. We used to hear about it, and pretty bad. I saw it once. I actually saw it in 1927. I'd down on holiday in Queen Street for a fortnight. You had to get poking around up around the fort, waiting for the guns to go. And around from the fort a bit in the tea tree, there was a big open air picture show. And next to that was this army camp. There one day, and I hear these voices roar, roar, roar. I thought, by God, that must be that army camp I used to hear about. So I sneaked around through the tea tree, and there it was. There's 6 or 8 of the bucks, boys, cadets, under 18. Probably, or it'd have to be because if they under 18 they'd be. And I used to get them out there first in the morning and walk them around, and then they'd take different officers come out and run them around, run their legs the whole day. Oh, but well, I was lucky that I didn't get landed down here because one time there was a little bit of a brawl in Dunolly there. An officer and one of the boys got at it, and the officer got a big black eye out of the fight. And of course, the big inquiry. Up come the warrant officers with their red caps on, and real army. But the one that got smacked, he's only a lieutenant in Dunolly. He wasn't in the regular army. He's just a lieutenant this particular place. See? So they had this big inquiry, and they're going to play hell with him, like taking evidence and the different cadets that was there. And anyway, there was a chap called Lieutenant Ern V. Cash, his name was. We described it to him. He said, well, it started with an argument. Oh, yeah. We said, how did it start? Well, we told him that the lieutenant was going crook at one of the boys. He was a bit of a ratbag, the boy, anyhow. The lieutenants were more or less in the right to go crook at him because he's a little bit of a poor affair. And he waved his hand up and he said, the lieutenant, don't you raise your hand to me, he said. And he got up again, and the lieutenant smacked him in the jaw. And that's what saved him. He hit him first. Oh, he said. Lieutenant Cash said, oh. Yeah, all the boys around, they said, you all saw that? Yeah, they saw that. Yeah, they had a bit of a confab there. Anyhow, it appears that a few weeks before that we'd had what they called a musketry session up on the range, and there was Cash was there and a couple of other army fellas there, and they brought a gallon of beer up there and a demijohn, and they drank that. Somebody wired enough to wake up. And this fellow that was going to blister, he said, "Well," he said, "you do anything to me," he said, "I'll blow the gaff about that beer," and that shut him up straight away. Because they had no right to go on the ranks with all those cadets there. That's what saved him.